So, guess who this is? This is Ales Kot.
Hello.
He writes Zero. He writes
Hello?
Secret Avengers.
Hello.
He writes Winter Soldier right now. So you're pretty much set at this point with 3 very distinct titles and a very distinct voice, where you're basically writing about war and violence and politics and how the deep scars affect people. This even goes into the work at the Secret Avengers and also even in Winter Soldier. Now, the interesting thing about you is that you have this quality of essentially absolute sincerity coupled with intellectual curiosity. And let's talk about Zero first, since that's the one that's closest to everyone's heart. Everyone reads Zero, and it's very much about the scars. It's like if James Bond's scars were real and was related to social and political history. So let's talk about that, because we're at this point where we're beginning to see the shape of the story and where Zero is going to go now, and about basically a man and his history and his trauma. And that, can you talk about how that relates to your own autobiographical stuff and things that you're working through and thinking about in your own life and background?
Yes, absolutely. Zero really began as an exploration of the war meme and violence, and those are things that I find can be largely unprocessed in one's mind unless we really do pay attention to them. For me specifically, I can definitely pinpoint certain parts of my life where I felt like I had violent impulses that I was feeling very uncomfortable with, and I never really quite knew how to work with them without, being harmful to the society. So I sort of assumed that maybe the way is to actually just sort of like keep them and not really do anything about them. But that's not really good, because that's this sort of it's a very reductive behavior, and it doesn't really show the world the fullness of what a person can be. Now, there are multiple ways of utilizing that energy, and I believe that that energy is essentially misinterpreted creative energy. As in, it turns into this bleak, dark, heavy matter that's really hard to manipulate and really hard to work with, and that can turn into violence, and that can turn into very bleak things. But at the same time, in a way, it's almost like primordial chaos, where if that energy is steered the right way, it becomes creative energy. And that creative energy can be utilized to create just about anything. So it's a combination of having a will and recognizing that as an inherent creativity, which is something that very much connects to the idea of Zero, because Zero is someone who has that bleak male rage integrated as a part that he is told by the agency that he works for is actually a good thing. And when he starts questioning that, he starts exploring other possibilities, or at least starts trying to tear himself out of what he no longer sees as necessarily good for him or for the universe around him. Combined with that, when we look at past societies and our society now, there's a reason for certain laws, specifically laws that funnel young children towards army and towards war, rather than essentially encouraging creative expression, because that's sort of a misinterpreted will, especially at an early stage of development, I believe, can be really powerful thing. And you don't really know what to necessarily do with it. And if people tell you, we think that this is what you should do with it, unless you have a very specific understanding, or at least you really listen to your heart, it might be really hard to figure it out. And
it's very much about trying to process through genetic memory and genetic history of violence.
Yes, absolutely. Also, it's war leaves scars, and whenever someone promotes a comic or any work of fiction that promotes war as something that is actually a good thing, I don't really quite believe that. I've never seen a war that was good, you know? It's like, I want to imagine other possibilities. And I want to imagine worlds where war is no longer necessary, because I feel that if we can start by imagining certain worlds and start imagining them worldwide, perhaps sooner or later we could actually succeed. Which can be, you know, some people might assume that that's idealism, and I understand that certain people think that idealism is a bad word, and I frankly don't believe in good or bad words. I believe that it's a word that's very powerful, because I do believe in my ideals and I do believe in my ideas, and I want to see them in the world. They're not necessarily even my ideas. I mean, Alan Moore sort of said it really well a few times when he was talking about how he's not even sure whether we are using the ideas or the ideas are using us. But as far as the ideas that my heart really responds to, they are not ideas that promote war. So looking at something like James Bond, I was thinking, well, it can be beautifully shot and so many things can feel right about it, but at the core it really does promote this sense of almost like Randian triumph of will, really, you know, like
well, there's a fascistic tone about violence and
very much so, yes. And I am very much anti-fascist. Not anti-fascist in a way where I believe that the only good fascist is a dead fascist, but in the way where I believe that people who identify or act as fascists can actually see that there are other ways of creating society that are not fear-based, which fascism and extreme forms of capitalism, and also extreme forms of capitalism that used to be masked as communism or sort of dictatorships, these forms can be transcended and we can invent something better. I fully believe that, and I want to dedicate my life to exploring how and figuring out new ways of interacting on a communal level, on an interpersonal level, and also interacting with myself. And my hope is that through my fiction I can do all three at the same time.
Yep. Ales Kot, thanks very much.
You're welcome.